I'm joined this hour by Dr. Michael Oren, former ambassador of Israel to the United States, former historian extraordinaire at Princeton, a great author of many books, and my friend. Dr. Oren, first of all, I hear you killed it when you were in the desert with an audience a couple of weeks back. My friend Beth was in the crowd and said you really gave quite the remarkable speech. And when she told me that on Friday, I thought, I got to see if Oren will join me on Monday morning to discuss the President's State of the Union and especially the K-Part interview yesterday. So I appreciate your putting aside time for me. We're going to go up and down in order to cover it all. I want to begin by first thanking you. Number two, what is your general reaction to both the State of the Union remarks that the president had about Israel and his remarks to Jonathan Capehart, my colleague at the Washington Post yesterday, or on Saturday?
Good morning, Hugh. It was great to be out in Palm Springs to meet with your friends. As you know, I've been in the United States for a long time now. I'm going home about a week from now. I've been to, about 20 different cities across the United States, defending the state of Israel at a very, very dark time. And where many communities, particularly Jewish communities across the United States, feel alone, feel beleaguered, and need to hear a message from Israel that we are standing strong, we're not giving in. We're not accepting pressures for a ceasefire, and we're going to defend our state, period. We're going to survive, and we're going to go back to thriving as well. The situation with the Biden administration is very painful. It is very irresponsible, and it is dangerous. It is dangerous, and I'll unpack that one at a time. Painful because on one hand, the president has opposed ceasefires resolutions in the Security Council. The United States has vetoed 3 resolutions. And I've said this so many times on this program, I have to say it again, that a ceasefire means, in effect, death for the state of Israel. I mean, it sounds very ameliorative to have a ceasefire. People stop shooting at each other. But what does a ceasefire mean? It means that Hamas gets away with mass murder. Hamas wins. Everything Hamas does, everything Iran does in the Middle East by shooting at American forces, by stopping trade through the Mandeb Straits, is designed to pressure the United States, to pressure Israel to get a ceasefire, because a ceasefire means Hamas wins and Israel dies. Why do we die? Because we can't restore internal security. No one will go back to our border areas. Large swaths of the state of Israel will be rendered uninhabitable. We'll have absolutely no deterrence power in the region. Iran will understand, and I think quite rightly, that it can attack us with impunity. And we won't be able to respond. We won't be able to defend ourselves because the world will tie our hands with a ceasefire each time. And what is left for the state of Israel? Our raison d'etre is to defend the Jewish state, to defend the land of Israel. We won't be able to actually live up to the reason why Israel was created. So a ceasefire being vetoed in this resolutions in the Security Council is very much appreciated and welcome. On the other hand, in addition, the Biden administration has been giving Israel vital forms of munitions and ammunition at a time when there's a world munitions shortage because of the Ukraine. Although the type of munitions that the administration has been giving Israel hasn't been heavy munitions, it's been precise munitions, which have a very good effect for, say, eliminating a very specific target in a very specific room. But if you have to, for example, free 2 hostages in a densely built-up area, those precision bombs won't be any good. You've got to lay down an artillery barrage of 155 millimeter artillery shells, and that is what is not arriving, and then there's a great shortage there. So you have those 2, I call ammo and veto, that the administration is doing. On the other hand, the administration is coming out virtually nightly now for many weeks, and not just intimating, but stating that Israel has been dehumanizing the Palestinians, has been bombing indiscriminately in Gaza, and the rather strange locution used by the Secretary of State has been killing too many Palestinians. Entirely too many Palestinians have been killed. It's a very strange locution because it suggests that there's a number that would have been okay, right? What's too many? But would be, you know what I'm saying here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very strange.
So generally speaking,
go ahead. I'll unpack all of it.
I got to ask you about the K-Part red line, because the most important thing the president said, in fact, I'll play it for you in order when we get through it, but the president said there's a red line around Rafah. If there is, it's one that should be erased, and I'm sure Israel doesn't see one. What was your reaction to that? Because he kind of bumbled into that. I'm not sure that was policy, but he said it.
I don't know if it is policy or isn't policy, but there's no red line. The red line then is Israel's existence. And we cannot do this. There's a history behind this. I'm a historian by training. And if you go back through all of Israel's wars, going back to 1956, and this including the Six-Day War, of course, the Yom Kippur War, the Lebanon War, the 1999 Gulf War, the 2000, I can go through 2006 Second Lebanon War, all the wars with Hamas, the United States has said to us, stop, and we stopped. You know, the Six-Day War would have been an 8-day war or a 9-day war. The United States stop, we stop. This is the time where the United States is going to say stop, and we're not going to stop because we cannot stop. And Israelis understand that, by the way. There's no big debate in Israel about this. There's no anti-war protests in Israel. There may be out-to-war protests outside the Oscars, but there's none in Jerusalem, there's none in Tel Aviv.
Well, there's an attempt to turn Bibi into the focus of animus, and it's not Bibi. It's Bibi might pay a political price down the road. We don't know. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the war today. 9 out of 10 Israelis support going into Rafah. Am I right about that? 9 out of 10 want Hamas destroyed and the tunnels destroyed?
I'm surprised only 9 out of 10. I'm surprised only 9 out of 10. You know, they may not have Bibi Netanyahu to kick around anymore. But if he goes, the policies will remain totally unchanged. And in fact, they may even be more aggressive because Netanyahu is notoriously conflict averse. Remember, there was a previous administration that used to call him a certain word, that he was a chicken something, remember? And, you know, under Benny Gantz, there would be any difference. No, Yair Lapid, maybe even more aggressive. Because, again, these are existential issues for the state of Israel. They're not negotiable.
I really do want to have you respond piece by piece. So we'll start with the State of the Union. We'll end with the K-part interview. Cut number 24. This is the president at the State of the Union.
I know the last 5 months have been gut-wrenching for so many people, for the Israeli people, for the Palestinian people, and so many here in America. This crisis began on October 7th with a massacre by a terrorist group called Hamas, as you all know. 1,200 innocent people, women and girls, men and boys, slaughtered after enduring sexual violence. The deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And 250 hostages taken. Here in this chamber tonight are families whose loved ones are still being held by Hamas. I pledge to all the families that we will not rest until we bring every one of your loved ones home.
Okay, Dr. Oren, your response to that. That's the start.
That's the start. Okay, that's good. And he did that. There were hostage families there. There was actually a released hostage there, Mia Shem. She was 51 days in captivity. I think would have been nice if the president had actually acknowledged her presence there, as is traditional during the State of the Union address. If you have a very extraordinary guest in the House, they're usually acknowledged. In this case, she was not. But that was pretty much all he gave to Israel. Then he spent most of his
Now
remarks,
we turn. Let me go through it. Cut number 25. Cut number 25.
Israel has the right to go after Hamas. Hamas ended this conflict by releasing hostages, laying down arms, could end it by releasing the hostages, laying down arms, and surrendering those responsible for October 7th. But Israel has Israel has a added burden because Hamas hides and operates among the civilian population like cowards under hospitals, daycare centers, and all the like. Israel also has a fundamental responsibility, though, to protect innocent civilians in Gaza.
Okay, now, Dr. Oren, this is where the turn begins. What did you think of the fundamental responsibility? That's new to the law of warfare. I know the law of warfare a little bit, and I know that Israel is going above and beyond the requirements of the laws of armed conflict, but the president intimates that Israel is not.
Well, you'll see what happens in the next cut. And he goes into greater detail about whether or not Israel is living up to that responsibility that he has established.
Yeah, well, we have 1 minute. I don't want to play that cut until we come back. So don't go anywhere, America, except over to Dr. Michael Oren, Dr. Michael Oren on X to follow him there. We will post the entire audio video of this and transcript on the web for you a little bit later today. Dr. Oren, what is your Substack?
It's called Clarity.
That's very easy for people to find. Go and subscribe to it, get it, and get clarity. And then Dr. Oren, of course, is tireless. Are you still working for Hezbollah on this tour, or are you doing this for...
Yes.
It's Hezbollah. I have taken
maybe
Dr.
Hezbollah
Oren's recommendation as the professional Mrs. Hewitt and I have contributed to Hezbollah as, okay, Michael knows where the money ought to go to the people who are nonpartisan, apolitical, and immediately responding. So I suggest that you go to Hezbollah and become a Hezbollah supporter as well. We'll ask more about that after the break. Stand by. We'll come right back during the break. I'll put it into the podcast, and the hour will continue. Welcome back, America. I'm talking with Dr. Michael Oren this morning. Cut number 26, Joe Biden at the State of the Union for Dr. Oren to respond to.
This war has taken a greater toll on innocent civilians than all previous wars in Gaza combined. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are not Hamas. Thousands and thousands of innocent women and children, girls and boys, also orphaned. Nearly 2 million more Palestinians under bombardment or displacement. Homes destroyed, neighborhoods in rubble, cities in ruin. Families without food, water, medicine. It's heartbreaking. I've been working nonstop to establish an immediate ceasefire that would last for 6 weeks to get all the prisoners released, all the hostages released, to get the hostages home and ease the intolerable and humanitarian crisis.
Ambassador Oren, your response.
Well, the situation in Gaza is tragic. It is heartbreaking. That is true. The reason it's heartbreaking is because of Hamas. And the implication here is that Israel has not lived up to its responsibility to protect the civilians of Gaza. We can debate at length the degree to which those civilians bear responsibility for Hamas by voting for Hamas and supporting for Hamas. And the Mia Shem, that the hostage that was released, who was in the audience that night, will tell you that she believes there's no difference between the people of Gaza and Hamas, that those people of Gaza beat her and spit at her and guarded her and kept her in captivity. But let's not pick, hairs over that. Split hairs over that. I think the major issue here is he has been working day and night to release the hostages, but America's position has undermined the hostage negotiations. Because think, if you're Yahya Sinwar, you're the head of Hamas, you're sitting in your tunnel, and you're thinking that if I just hold on for another, say, week or two, I keep on hiding behind my civilian population. I keep on getting that civilian population killed and starved because Hamas is stopping food from getting and stealing food, because believe me, all the terrorists are very well fed. And eventually, if I hold on, the United States will impose a ceasefire. So why would I give up any hostages right now? Why would I move from my maximum position is that Israel will not get a hostage unless it declares that it's lost the war and withdraws all of its troops from Gaza. It is the strangest position, I must say, because if you want the hostage released, you have to convince Sinwar that he's going to die unless he releases the hostages. But the message from Washington is just the opposite.
What about using the Israeli, the Gazan Health Ministry numbers of 30,000? I heard a very detailed explication about why that ought not be the case. Your idea.
Yeah, you probably read the article in Tablet Magazine. But of course,
yep.
Hamas always inflates it. They also include, what's amazing is, they include in that figure the roughly 13,000 terrorists that Israel has killed. They don't distinguish between the two. And they include in that figure the great numbers of Palestinians who have been killed by rockets falling short. And by the way, the word rocket didn't appear anywhere in that speech. I mean, Hamas fired 12,000 rockets at this country. Okay, and there wasn't any reference to Hezbollah also, which is now outfiring Hamas and its rockets. So you have a country under rocket fire. A large part of the country is uninhabitable, not mentioned. And so, if you deduct, the 13,000 Palestinians that we have killed, the terrorists that we have killed, and the Palestinians killed by their own rockets, and by the way, a normal death rate in Gaza, you're going to get something close to a 1-to-1 combatant to civilian death ratio, which is very
low. It may be the lowest in any major conflict I've ever studied. Stand by. I'll be back with Dr. Michael.
It was in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq.
Welcome back, America. During the break, which you can hear later on Highly Concentrated Hugh, Dr. Oren made the point that the president's use of the number 30,000 Gazans dead includes the 13,000 or more Hamas terrorists who are dead and results in a 1-to-1 or 1-to-1.1 or 1.2 ratio, which I think is the lowest in any major armed conflict of which I'm aware in post-war time, and certainly during World War II. Do you agree with that, Doctor Oren? You're a historian. I don't think any major war, and this is a major war, has ever done one for one, a civilian for a fighter.
Yeah, not even the NATO intervention in Serbia in 1999. That was 4-1. By the way, all recorded by Brown University. It's public information. This is not disputable. And not just that, the United States in battles like in Mosul and Fallujah was up against a much, much smaller enemy that was far less dug in. The civilian population could run away. They can't do that very well in Gaza. I don't think any army in history has ever faced the type of challenges that the IDF is facing in Gaza, and I think it is performed admirably, and they'll be studying it in the academies. I don't know what they're going to say in the pages of the New York Times, but in West Point, they're going to be studying this campaign for many years to come.
Cut number 27, the president then introduces a new idea. Cut 27.
The United States has been leading international efforts to get more humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day.
All right, I think this has got Beirut, 1983, Somalia, Black Hawk Down written all over it, but what do you think of the idea, Dr. Oren?
Well, first of all, according to Israeli sources, this was an Israeli idea that was floated as early as October and not accepted by the United States at the time. You can make the dock, they can bring in the dock, but two things are going to happen. One, how do you get the food from the dock into Gaza? That's the whole issue. The UN won't do it. They're too afraid. The United States won't put boots on the ground, so who's going to end up doing it? We're going to end up doing it. And what's going to happen is Hamas is going to try to prevent the aid. This is difficult to wrap your head around. Hamas wants the population of Gaza to starve, because the more population of Gaza starves, the more pressure we put on Israel by the United States and others to agree to a ceasefire. It all comes down to a ceasefire again. So Israel's going to end up doing it. Israel's going to get shot at. And the next thing that could happen is that someone's going to send a drone to hit one of the ships bringing food.
All right, let me play for you cut 28 because it's connected. Cut 28, please.
And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire.
All right, now, I've got to say, Dr. Oren, you just said Hamas wants Gaza to starve. I agree with you. They want Hamas. So this is an appeal to Hamas that left the ceasefire negotiations because they don't want a ceasefire because their objective is dead Jews. Do you think the president doesn't know that, or do you think dead Palestinians?
The way to get more dead Jews is through more dead Palestinians. That will lead to a ceasefire. I think that there's lots of politics going on here, and when he talked about his criticism of Israel, received probably the biggest applause of the evening, and missing from that, what can I say? Would be the sense that Israel is our ally, our democratic ally, and we're going to stand foursquare behind Israel and not let Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, to conclude that he can get between us, that he can insinuate himself between us, and that we're going to start pressuring Israel for a ceasefire. Just the opposite. The message to Washington, to Sinwar, is hold on, hope is coming.
Yeah.
And
if I had been the president of the United States, I would have said the equal of any of our allies, Israel has suffered a devastating blow, and we will stand by with them until the enemy is eliminated, as it was eliminated in Germany and Japan, and as we originally eliminated al-Qaeda. We're coming right back, Dr. Oren, so do not go anywhere. America, I remind you, this will be all of it, including I'm going to talk with Dr. Oren during the break about the last part of the State of the Union. Then when we come back on air, we'll talk about Jonathan Capehart. We'll spend the hour doing this so that you have a comprehensive response from a longtime figure in American and Israeli politics, Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Oren, Princeton historian, author of many great books, and also the Substack is Clarity, and you ought to be listening to Dr. Oren everywhere. Reading his book, Ally, is a very, very good book. 2048, Beth asked me about last night. Said it's a great book, but it was written before 10/7, so he's going to have to revise it on the needs coming up. But follow Dr. Oren on X at Dr. Michael Oren and understand that's about as smart a take as you can get from a person outside of the government who knows what's going on inside of the government. Stand by. I'll be right back with Dr. Oren. Welcome back, America. I'm rejoined by Dr. Oren for the part of the podcast that will appear off air Dr. Oren, I want to play for you cut 29 and 30. It's the last of the two cuts from the President's State of the Union.
As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time. And I say this as a lifelong supporter of Israel. My entire career, no one has a stronger record with Israel than I do. I challenge any of you here. I'm the only American president of Israel in wartime. But there is no other path that guarantees Israel's security and democracy. There is no other path that guarantees that Palestinians can live in peace with peace and dignity. And there's no other path that guarantees peace between Israel and all of its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, with whom I'm talking.
And cut 29?
Creating stability in the Middle East also means containing the threat posed by Iran. That's why I built a coalition of more than a dozen countries to defend international shipping and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. I've ordered strikes to degrade the Houthi capability and defend U.S. forces in the region. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and our military personnel.
All right, Dr. Oren, I don't think we're containing Iran, the opposite, and I don't believe a two-state solution is going to happen in my lifetime, your lifetime, or the lifetime of my children, hopefully my grandchildren. What do you think?
No, and I think that right now, certainly, that the vast majority of Israelis would not be willing to remotely entertain the thought, including the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, who is the former head of the Labor Party, who in Davos recently said that they'll talk about a two-state solution this time is sheer madness. No one, who is going to run that state? Is it going to be the Palestinian Authority? Mahmoud Abbas, who's in the 19th year of his four-year term, will not stand for re-election because 85% of the Palestinians in the West Bank support Hamas. So yes, he can say, as American leaders have said now for some 31 years, the only path to peace is a two-state solution. It's tragic because there are other paths that are actually blocked because of this obsession with a two-state solution, which isn't going to happen in the short run. I mean, if I were running Israel, I would say to Joe Biden, we can discuss a path. A path is a thing with gravel and shrubbery. It doesn't commit us in any way, but putting emphasis on the two-state solution, I think, is very, very counterproductive. It obviates other issues, other venues such as federative solutions, cantonment solutions on the Swiss model. There are other ways you can go, but no one's pausing to say, what does this state mean? What does it look like? Is it democratic? Is it imposed? Is leadership imposed by the United States? Is it demilitarized in any way? No one. That's the mantra, the two-state solution, and unfortunately, people buy into it.
Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates said that Joe Biden is famous for famously being wrong about everything involving national security for 40 years at the time. Now it's 50 years. I understand it's a talking point and it's for domestic political consumption. But does it, in fact, lose his ability to get Israeli population to listen to him when he talks about what is, in effect, an alternative reality that doesn't exist?
I think it's just part of a general approach, which is, again, it's counterproductive. Israel is going to appreciate the vetoes cast against the ceasefire. It's going to appreciate the munitions that have been supplied to us. But there's been a major deterioration in the American position to Israel since that visit by the president during wartime, and certainly his speech of right after the horrors of October 7th was deeply appreciated by the Israeli people. Right now, the message, again, coming out of Washington is for Hamas to hold fast. The ceasefire is coming from the United States, talking about a red line. What is the red line? The red line, you cross the red line, what is America not going to support Israel anymore? If you're Yahya Sinwar, again, you're thinking, okay, let's get Israel to cross that red line. And there'll be that breakdown. Not a word about Hezbollah in the north.
We will be right back. We're going to come right back with Come to Jesus Talk. Michael, who grew up in New York, absolutely understands what a Come to Jesus meeting is. And we'll talk about the appropriateness of the president saying that, as well as just what it means. He says inappropriate things all the time. We don't worry about it. But for those of you who are wondering why I'm talking to Dr. Oren, headline, Sharpening criticism, Biden says Netanyahu hurting Israel more than he's helping. He's wrong, PM bluntly rejects Biden critique, another headline. Middle East crisis, Biden-Netanyahu dispute over Gaza war heats up. In the Wall Street Journal, bid to pause Israeli Hamas war falters before Ramadan strikes. And then Hezbollah bombards north with rockets after deadly IDF strike. I'll be back to talk about all those things and what the president had to say to Capehart. Jonathan Capehart, my MSNBC and Washington Post, my old and current colleague, right after this. Stay tuned. America, I'm Hugh Hewitt, back with Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. He's in the States. He's joining me early for an entire hour because an Israeli's response, as I did with Haviv Rediger on Friday, is important. But Dr. Oren's a senior statesman kind of guy in Israel, and I thought we should ask him. All right, immediately after the State of the Union, the president hangs around, talks to Michael Bennett of Colorado, says this to him, cut number one.
This is one of the big
Great speech. Really nice. I was telling your secretary, I was in Jordan and Israel last weekend, and we got to keep pushing what we're doing on the humanitarian stuff and all this stuff. So
I told him, maybe some pieces. So he didn't want you to come to Jesus.
So what happens there is that Secretary Buttigieg and Secretary Blinken are standing next to the president when Michael Bennett, senator from Colorado, approaches him, says we need more aid for Gaza. He said, don't tell anyone, but I told Bibi we've got to have a come to Jesus meeting on that. That's tin-eared. That's the best I can say, tin-eared. What did you think about that, Dr. Oren?
Well, I don't think that comment is as damaging as some of the comments made by Vice President Kamala Harris, where she says the Biden administration distinguishes between the government of Israel and the people of Israel. And I, an Israeli, am very offended by that. I'm not going to defend our government, certainly not many policies, and certainly not many of the ministers in that government who I find offensive. But what that remark says is that we don't really respect Israeli democracy. And Israel being one of the few countries in the world that has never known a second of non-democratic governance, and the only country on that list that's never known a moment of peace, I think a little respect for our democracy from our democratic ally is called for. Don't you, Hugh?
I do, but I don't think you're going to get it from this Democratic Party. I do believe you're going to see a significant realignment of the American Jewish vote after this. But let's keep going. Jonathan Capehart yesterday, now on Saturday, begins to work through the State of the Union in the aftermath because the fallout was intense, both from the left and the right, and the center even took notice of it. Cut number one, this is Joe Biden on MSNBC with my Washington Post colleague, Jonathan Capehart. Cut number two.
You were caught on a hot mic after your State of the Union address talking to Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Senator Michael Bennett saying, quote, I told him, Bibi, and don't repeat this, but you and I are going to have a come to Jesus meeting. What do you mean by that?
What I meant was, it's an expression used in the southern part of my state, meaning a serious meeting. And it was, I've known Bibi for 50 years, and he knew what I meant by it.
So what's the come to Jesus part? What tough love are you going to give to the prime minister?
What's happening is he has a right to defend Israel, a right to continue to pursue Hamas, but he must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken. He's hurting, in my view, he's hurting Israel more than helping Israel by making the rest of the world, it's contrary to what Israel stands for. And I think it's a big mistake. So I want to see a ceasefire.
I'm so astonished by that 1 minute. It's not even the worst part of the interview, but what do you think about that, Dr. Oren?
I'm going to say, at the risk of repeating myself many times, it's the message to Sinwar, hold on. And, if we're Bibi to go tomorrow, and I have a bit of a debate with some of my colleagues about this, how many days of grace it would give us? Because the policy is not going to change one iota. Nothing. And the big debate in Israel, Hugh, is not whether Israel's killing too many Palestinians, but whether we're jeopardizing the lives of our soldiers by taking extraordinary efforts to limit Palestinian casualties. And soldiers are coming out of Gaza furious. We've had protests by soldiers. Get zero credit for this. And again, the message is the wrong message. Bibi could go tomorrow and maybe get 3 or 4 days of grace from the press and maybe from the president. But at the end of the day, the policies remain unchanged because, again, I'm repeating myself. This is an existential battle. And,
okay, here is the heart of the controversy. Cut 6 and 7 back to back, please. Take about a minute and a half. Cut 6 and 7 of President Biden with Jonathan Capehart.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you have a red line? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do, would that be a red line?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have. But there's red lines that if he crosses, he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas. And it's like look, the first time I went over, I sat with them and I sat with the war cabinet. I said, look, don't make the mistake America made. America made a mistake. We went after bin Laden until we got him, but we shouldn't have gone into Ukraine. I mean, we shouldn't have gone into the whole thing in Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. And it just caused more problems in the race than it's been cured.
Who actually wants a deal? Do you think Hamas actually wants a ceasefire?
Well, I think Hamas would like a total ceasefire across the board because they would see they have a better chance to survive and maybe rebuild. But that's not what I think. The vast majority of people think. You have to look. After what happened in World War II and the carpet bombing that took place, what happened was we ended up in a situation where we changed the rules of the game, what constitutes legitimate rules of war.
That makes no sense, by the way, Dr. Oren, in terms of what he's trying to connect the dots. But he realizes he stepped in it when he said Hamas wants a ceasefire so they can survive. He admitted your point, which you've been making repeatedly. But the red line stuff calls to mind Syria, calls to mind you may not go into Rafah, and it's like a load of bricks dropping.
Well, on the contrary, President Obama didn't uphold his red line in Syria.
Correct.
The danger here that there actually is a line that somebody in Washington would want to uphold. Again, the implication is that we've killed 30,000 Palestinians. We've done this maliciously, that we've bombed indiscriminately, and that somehow this is the policy of Bibi Netanyahu. That is like, it's wrong, and unfair. And I think it's deleterious to our position. It's deleterious to America's position. I think the message to the world is, we're not going to stick by this ally. I know, Joe Biden's been a great friend, and I've worked with him, and I have a very high regard for him and his staff. I think there are major policy failures going on here, big mistakes.
I do want to emphasize, for fairness purposes, the only time I've met the president when he was a senator. I was talking to and broadcasting from the AIPAC conference in the early aughts, and he stopped by and we had a 30-minute conversation about supporting Israel. I don't know what's happened, except that the people around him are not the people that he used to be. One more cut to play for you, then I'm just going to open up. Cut. This is the Prime Minister responding to Axel Springer yesterday about the red line. Cut number 8.
Well, I don't know exactly what the president meant, but if he meant by that I'm pursuing private policies against the wish of the majority of Israelis, and that this is hurting the interests of Israel, then he's wrong on both counts. Number one, these are not my private policies only. They're policies supported by the overwhelming majority of the Israelis. They support the action that we're taking to destroy the remaining terrorist battalions of Hamas. They say that once we destroy the Hamas, the last thing we should do is put in Gaza, in charge of Gaza, the Palestinian Authority that educates its children towards terrorism and pays for terrorism. And they also support my position that says that we should resoundingly reject the attempt to ram down our throats a Palestinian state. That is something that they agree on, and it's something that I think is also for the interests of Israel, because the majority of Israelis understand that if we don't do this, what we'll have is a repetition of the October 7th massacre, which is bad for Israel, bad for the Palestinians, bad for the future of peace in the Middle East. So the attempt to say that my policies are my private policies that are not supported by most Israelis is false. The vast majority are united as never before, and they understand what's good for Israel.
So, Dr. Oren, you have known the Prime Minister a long time, but I want the audience to know that you've served in a party other than Likud. You are critical of Benjamin Netanyahu when you want to be. You're supportive when you want to be. I think he's 100% right here, but what do you, the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, think about what the Prime Minister said?
Here it is. If you look at our polls in our country, the vast majority of Israelis would like Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. But the same 80% of Israelis don't want this war to end. So he's absolutely right. They're not his policies. It's the state of Israel's policies. There's a great confusion, I think deliberate confusion on the part of people in Washington, because, yes, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military is the president of the United States, but the commander-in-chief of the Israel Defense Forces is not the prime minister. It's not the defense minister. It's not the chief of staff. The prime minister can't make policy by himself in the state of Israel. He doesn't command the army. The army is commanded by a government, and it's commanded by a war cabinet that includes Benny Gantz, for example, in it. He's making these decisions also. And so the attempt to impute all the blame to Benjamin Netanyahu is deeply inaccurate. Maybe they want to get that straw man up there and beat the hell out of him. But were he to go tomorrow, again, that policy would remain utterly, utterly unchanged.
So, Dr. Oren, is the red line that the president puts out there really a red line, not just around Rafah, but around Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis, and Iran? Is it really a red line that says Israel has to go no further to defend itself, and maybe even the West Bank terrorists? Because once you start imposing red lines to protect terrorists, I don't know where you stop.
Well, keep in mind, I try to see various, crises from the perspective of the actors involved. I've several times made reference to the fact that this is the way Yahya Sinwar sees this, but it's also you have to look at the way Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, is looking at this, and looking at the United States tying Israel's hands, trying to avoid a regional conflict. And I understand that from the administration's point of view. The last thing they want is get dragged into a Middle East war right now, and the criticism of the president's handling from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and other constituencies in the United States is costing him politically. I understand all that. But the message to the region is that the United States is going to tie Israel's hand, and so it's open season. And I think that is a dangerous policy. And my big fear, Hugh, is that Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah are waiting like Sinwar is waiting for a breakdown in U.S.-Israel relationship. At that point, they will release the 150,000 rockets in their arsenal. And Hamas is a tactical threat to the state of Israel. Hezbollah is a strategic threat to the state of Israel. And
stand by. I'll be right back with Dr. Oren during the break, and we have 3 more segments with him, so don't go anywhere. He's being very generous this morning, but I want a comprehensive view out there of an Israeli diplomat's response to the president's rather erratic comments in the State of the Union, and then his mystifying comments to Jonathan Capehart and to Michael Bennett. Stay tuned. I am back with Dr. Michael Oren, former ambassador of Israel to the United States. He's touring the United States, as he often does. I don't know if you're touring for United Hezbollah this time. Are you, Dr. Oren?
Yeah, I am this evening. I'll be for Hezbollah this evening in Philadelphia.
Would you explain just briefly what Hezbollah is and why every Republican, Democrat, Independent, any American friend of Israel can support Hezbollah without involving themselves in politics?
Hezbollah is the world's largest volunteer emergency medical service. It's 7,500 paramedics, Jews, Arabs, religious, secular, women, men, who are on 24/7 call to assist and save Israelis, Palestinians. The major vehicle is an ambucycle. It's a motorcycle that does everything an ambulance does, except take you to the hospital. But it saves the lives. And in an urban environment, Hezbollah will get to you within 90 seconds. In an agrarian, an agricultural area, within 3 minutes. Saves hundreds, thousands of lives every year. During this crisis, Hezbollah was the first on the ground. We've had volunteers, including 2 Arab volunteers who were killed on October 7th, others taken into hostage, taken into captivity. And I'm here helping to raise money to replenish the supplies of Hezbollah, expand the medical services. Every dollar given to Hezbollah is going to saving human lives.
It may be the only word in Hebrew that I can pronounce, Hezbollah, because it's all A. So it's United Hezbollah. And if you go on Google, you're able... It's true. I butcher Hebrew pretty badly. All right, let's get back to the substance here. The imminence of a war on the north, Dr. Oren. I want to close with our last three segments. I read to you that Hezbollah bombarded the north with rockets yesterday. I mean, bombarded it with dozens. How long will Israel put up with this? We have about 3 minutes to coming back.
Well, not very long. I mean, the cards on the table. Back in the early October, I called for Israel to focus on the north and freeze the situation in the south because Hamas wasn't going in there, because Hamas is a tactical threat and Hezbollah is a strategic threat. Its rockets can take out all of our essential utilities, our airports, our army bases, and Dimona. And they have 100,000 terrorists.
Dimona being the site of nuclear weapon research and storage. Allegedly.
Our nuclear facility.
Yeah.
On a nuclear facility. 100,000 terrorists who have been assiduously massacring Syrians for the last decade, 500,000 Syrians. So this is a strategic threat to the state of Israel. The entire northern part of our country is uninhabitable right now. And that is an intolerable situation from any sovereign country, certainly for the state of Israel, threatened with national destruction by Hezbollah and its Iranian backers. So Israel's going to have to take measures. We simply, again, it's an existential moment. It's not a security issue, and I don't know why. We're waiting. We are probably waiting to conclude the campaign against Hamas, to give our army a little break, to store up on ammunition, and waiting for clear skies as well. You may notice historically we fight our wars between June and October because of those clear skies. My big fear is that Hezbollah will act first, and it has been my fear since October that we will lose the benefit of the first strike capability against Hezbollah. In any case, it will be a very difficult campaign. We'd have to move our army into southern Lebanon. The 150,000 rockets are situated under, some 200 Lebanese villages.
A tunnel complex, do you think, at least the equal of Hamas tunnel complex in Gaza?
Of a different measure, because is the rate of fire from Hezbollah rockets. Hamas fired 12,000 rockets at Israel since October 7th. The rate of fire from Hezbollah is estimated by the IDF to be as much as 6,000 rockets a day.
Wow.
Again, these are bigger rockets, longer rockets, and very accurate rockets.
Stand by, Dr. Oren. We're coming back onto the radio show. Welcome back, America. I'm with Dr. Michael Oren. Former ambassador of Israel to the United States, historian extraordinaire, touring the United States on behalf of Hezbollah, United Hezbollah. He'll be in Philadelphia this evening. Dr. Oren, I got to ask you, from your historian's hat, is there a chance that this is actually something Khamenei figured out? Let's get Hamas to do the massacre, draw Israel in, wear out America and the world's support for Israel, let them forget 10-7, then roll out the Houthis to destroy shipping, then roll out Hezbollah, and in the end, we'll deliver a coup de grace. I mean, could there be a plan here?
Well, I want to say I'm not a prophet, but on October 5th, I was in Dallas giving a speech to a real estate group. And I said to the audience, I said, I don't want to scare you, but I think Israel's going to be going to war soon. And there was a gasp. And then I explained that the Biden administration was trying to broker a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It had a strategic component, an economic component. It also had a nuclear component. Saudi Arabia was going to get nuclear power. And I said the Iranians are going to be damned if they're going to sit back quietly and let this happen. They're going to move to defend, to destroy it, and just by starting a local war. And they did. I think that we haven't found the smoking gun yet. I think we're going to find it. A lot of circumstantial evidence points to the fact that the Iranians were behind this. And yes, ever since then, the policy of Iran has been to pressure the United States, to pressure Israel to a ceasefire. Again, we're always going to come back to that ceasefire, whether by stopping shipping through the Mandeb Straits or firing repeatedly at American bases in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. That's what it's about. And Iran could end up winning massively because no one will take Iran. Iran has not paid any price for any of this, zero. After that tragic strike on the base that killed three American service people, I suggested the United States blow up the factory that created the drone that killed the soldiers, because that would be a double blow, a blow to Iran, but also a blow to Russia, which is using those drones to kill Ukrainians. But no price was exacted from Iran in any way. The United States bombed various proxies, and Iran doesn't care about the proxies. They're willing to fight those proxies to the last Iraqi to kill Americans.
The president did not mention the meteoric rise in anti-Semitism in the United States. Do you think he ought to have done so? And do you think this is so political? It's all about our November election and not about Israel's survival at this point.
Yes, he should have, and I understand, again, politically why he hasn't. One of my messages to American Jewish leadership, and I've been traveling across the United States, as you know, is that, not to get involved in partisan politics, not to get involved in the 2024 elections, but there has to be some pushback here. And because the only pushback is coming from that branch of the Democratic Party, which is opposing the degree to which the president is supporting the state of Israel. But you can criticize the administration's policy without saying, I'm not going to vote for the president, or I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Criticism should be voiced, and this was a great moment for calling out anti-Semitism and supporting the American Jewish community, because these communities that I'm meeting, Hugh, I've never seen anything like this. And I've been in this field a long time. I've seen fear in the face of American Jews, deep fear, and that's an extremely worrisome notion. I call attention to an article that's in The Atlantic by my former editor at the New Republic, Frank Foer. It's a very disturbing article about the end of the golden age of American Jewry and what American Jews are facing today.
John Podhoretz also wrote in commentary, "They're coming for us," and those are the two keystone articles. But John Podhoretz and Abe Greenwald, also of commentary, have had a 6-month or 5-month debate about whether Biden is talking tough about Netanyahu and Israel, but doing everything Israel needs. Abe Greenwald saying, no, Biden's going to screw Israel. I'm with Abe. Who are you with?
The jury's out, but I'm concerned because the damage has already been done already. Again, I fault many people in Washington for strengthening the position of Hamas and leading Hamas to conclude that it has everything to gain by holding on and not conceding, not giving up hostages. And I think that's tragic. I think it's tragic for Israel, certainly tragic for the hostages, and ultimately tragic for the Palestinians themselves.
I'm going to have one last question for Dr. Oren, but if you want to hear his assessment of what is going on in the politics of America as a result of this, you're going to have to wait and go find the podcast on Highly Concentrated Hugh, which will be up by 10 o'clock Eastern time today, because I got Dr. Oren up early. I don't know where he is, but he's up early, and I appreciate it very much. We have one more segment with... where are you right now, Dr. Oren?
I am in northern New Jersey. My mother has passed away 2 months ago, and I'm cleaning out the house I grew up in.
Oh, that's an emotionally fraught time. Dr. Oren, thank you. Again, thank you for spending time with us. We'll be right back. One more segment with Dr. Oren after these messages. Stay tuned. This will entirely be posted at Highly Concentrated Hugh at iTunes, Spotify, the Salem Podcast Network, and wherever podcasts are. Dr. Oren's Substack, which is briefly named Clarity, is a must-read in these times, especially in the months ahead, because this is going to get worse before it gets better. And Israel's not going to respect some pretend red line laid down by the President of the United States, maybe unintentionally. Couldn't even get through an MSNBC interview with Jonathan Capehart without. And then Kamala Harris is a wholly different thing. But we'll talk politics after the break on the conclusion of the podcast portion of today. So stay tuned, America. I'll be right back with Dr. Michael Oren, former ambassador to the United States. His book, Ally, A-L-L-Y, is a great summary of how Israel and the United States has conducted its relationship between two sovereign states that have often agreed but sometimes disagreed. And I don't think we've disagreed this badly since 1956. Stay tuned for one more segment with Dr. Oren. I am back with Dr. Michael Oren for a concluding couple of comments on the state of the Democratic Party. Dr. Oren, in 1956, Ike pulled the plug on the Suez Canal. And he was very upset. It was before an election. That was a Republican president, and support for Israel wasn't as bedrock as it is in the United States now. I joked with Aviv Rediger, I'm sure you run into a lot of Irish Catholic Zionists out there, but the number are growing. And Aviv argued that this is the greatest thing for creating Zionists on American campuses that he's ever seen. But he's only in his 40s. You and I are a little bit older. What is happening to the Democratic Party in Israel? Because this is a break.
Debate, certainly for the time being, and there was a break with the Republicans in the 1950s. By the way, Eisenhower, looking back on the Suez Crisis in 56, said it was the greatest single foreign policy mistake he made. bailing out Nasser and basically betraying his allies, the French, the British, and the Israelis. And if he hadn't, if Nasser had been brought down in 1956, you wouldn't have had a 1967 war. You wouldn't have had a 1973 war. You think about it, just the ramifications of that policy failure. And I hope America is not repeating that failure, which could have a domino effect that would span decades. And that is a definite fear. Listen, the same time that the New York Times rants against us with 4 or 5 front-page articles every single day designed to delegitimize us, and you see this in much of the American media, a recent Harvard poll, and I know you have a certain respect for this university still, a recent Harvard poll came out and said that 82% of Americans favor Israel in this battle. And no one's canvassing the opinions of people outside, say, of New York and Los Angeles or Chicago, but there's an America out there that remains very, very pro-Israel. And I encountered that with your friends in Palm Springs. That audience was largely not Jewish, just resoundingly pro-Israel. And I think that reflects much of American public opinion, who understands that this is not a battle between Israel and Hamas, or even Israel and Gaza, the Palestinians. It's a battle for Western civilization. It's a
what Beth emphasized from your talk, and which triggered my late-night call last night, is you stressed resilience, and I thought I translated that into determination to see it through. Hamas cannot survive, or they've said they'll do it again. And the mask is off by what they mean by that. They just mean killing Jews.
It was great, with the Palm Springs audience. Well, I could talk about evil in the world. And Hamas is evil, and we are facing that common evil. And that is why we have to prevail. Yes, it's essential for Israel's survival. It is a war. It's an existential struggle. But it's even more than that. The struggle for our civilization, the struggle for everything we value and hold dear, for our families and for our core beliefs. And people who understand, there's nobody I can think of. I'm looking across this administration. I don't see anybody who's actually held a gun and actually been in urban combat. But I have, and most of my family has, and no, war is horrible. War is miserable. Israel is doing its utmost to limit those civilian casualties, and we're paying a price for it. And that is a message that we have to get across. And I think the majority of Americans, those who aren't reading the New York Times or believing the New York Times, understand that, and they understand it intrinsically. And
I have recommended. I'll be recommending in the Post today or tomorrow. I don't know when the column published in the Washington Post, that former President Trump named Tom Cotton or Mike Pompeo or Joni Ernst, and there are a few others like J.D. Vance and Mike Gallagher who've held a gun in the Middle East and done what you've said. I want a warrior, because I just don't think Kamala Harris has any idea what she's talking about. And let's close there. The vice president also made a speech. It's even further to the left than Joe Biden. Has that party just decided they're in with the left and the left hates Israel?
I think that it's an election year, and we're talking about politics. There is a strange, I don't know, I almost want to call it a fetish. These are people who haven't necessarily shed many tears over the massacre of 500,000 Syrians, didn't shed many tears over the abandonment of hundreds of thousands of Afghanis, particularly Afghani women. But this deep, deep obsession with Palestinian losses, that's just become part of the political landscape generally in the United States over the course of several decades now. And it's
why is that? Dr. Oren, you've been in and out of government. You were the deputy minister. You're the ambassador. Is Israel just terrible at public diplomacy?
Well, we always be better at public diplomacy, but at the end of the day, this is all happening because we are the Jewish state. But as the Jewish state, we'll be treated as Jews, held to completely different moral standards. The only reason people are obsessed with the Palestinians is because their enemies are the Jews. When Syrians were massacring Palestinians, nobody cared. When Kuwait kicked 400,000 Palestinians out of Kuwait after the 1991 Gulf War, nobody cared. Hey, when Hamas killed 600 Palestinian policemen in 2007, when it took over the Gaza Strip, nobody cared. They only care because the Palestinians have us as an enemy. And I always say that the Palestinians should, bless their stars that they have us as an enemy, because nobody would care. People would care about as much as they cared when Bashar al-Assad massacred 500,000 of his own countrymen. And America didn't intervene, not even to enforce that red line.
Very last question, Dr. Oren. Is it possible to be anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic? Because I don't believe that. I believe anti-Zionism is just code word that keeps people feeling good that they're not anti-Semitic. But I just think they are.
Well, if there's any sort of sort of silver linings of this whole crisis. And there have been silver linings. It's revealed Israel is the most resilient society on earth. It's brought us together. It's reminded us that we are a nation, we're a people. It's taught us who our friends are in the world. But it's also resolved that great question, is anti-Zionism synonymous with anti-Semitism? It's been resolved. The people who are calling to throw Jews, who are protesting for Palestine, for Hamas, and saying throw Jews back in the gas chambers, they've resolved that question. I think most American Jews understand this is not an educational moment. They're not going to sit down with these people and remind them about the Holocaust. I think they're reminded of the Holocaust in a very good way. And the anti-Semitism today is a completely different. Now it's actually become morally superior to be anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. Clearly, it is not anti-Semitic to be critical of Israel. I think I'm critical of Israel. You've heard it on this program. But it is anti-Semitic to say that Jews are the only people on earth that do not deserve a state. It is anti-Semitic to hold Israel to a completely different moral standard than any other democracy in the world. It's anti-Semitic to call for Israel's destruction. And this is precisely what these protesters are doing out in the street. They're calling for Israel's destruction.
Dr. Michael Oren, again, thank you for an entire hour, very early on the East Coast. Good luck tonight with United Hezbollah Appeal in Philadelphia. And I will talk to you again on the radio soon. Thank you for joining me.